It is now my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today. Never mind that Governor John Kitzhaber is going to be here tonight in this very same room at a grease party, probably dancing the twist, but he is with us now as an elder statesman. A native of Oregon, John Kitzhaber graduated from the University of Oregon Medical School in 1973. 5 years later, he first ran for public office and was elected to the Oregon House of Representatives. In 1980, after one term in the House, he was elected to the first of 3 terms in the Oregon Senate, representing Douglas County and parts of Jackson County. He was elected Senate President in 1985 and served in that capacity until 1993. As Senate President, he oversaw the passage of major legislation, including the Oregon Health Plan and the Oregon Education Act for the 21st century. In a tribute to his bipartisan mastery in that session, he was characterized by his Republican counterpart in the Senate as a true legislative artist. On November 8, 1994, he was elected governor, and he took office on January 9, 1995. Aside from the Oregon Health Plan, Governor Kitzhaber is primarily known as steward of our environment. He received the prestigious Neuberger Award given by the Oregon Environmental Council, and he hosted a party in the Rose Garden when he vetoed legislation which would have undone Oregon's landmark land use laws. He even reportedly allowed us how he might be up in the trees nesting with the protesters concerned about the so-called salvage logging legislation. And most of all, he fly fishes, usually catch and release. Is he a visionary e-doc, mostly to be remembered for storing owl's heads in his mother Annabelle's refrigerator? Or is he an earth-firster? What we know for sure is that he is our chief executive, chiefly responsible for leading us Oregonians into the 21st century. His campaign slogan was "Face the facts, seize the future," and he's about to do that with us. Please join me in welcoming Governor John Kitzhaber for his first Fate of the State address.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. I haven't suffered that much damage in an introduction since the campaign. Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and according to tradition, this speech should be a summary of Oregon's status and all the great things I did over the past year to bring it about. As a matter of fact, Oregon is doing well. The state's doing remarkably well. Nearly every Oregon county is growing. Jobs are growing at about the same rate outside of Portland and the Willamette Valley as inside. And the even better news is that jobs are now growing faster than population growth, and that wages and per capita income are beginning to grow faster than the national average. But I think it's fair to say that today's prosperity didn't just happen. It would certainly be nice to be able to take credit for what's going on today, but the fact is, it wasn't the result of anything that happened in this past year. It is instead the result of vision and planning and commitment and investments that have taken place over the past 20 years. The very things that I contend are no longer happening in Oregon today. So instead of delivering the State of the State speech today, I do in fact want to talk about the fate of the state. And I want to share with you my vision for the state of Oregon and what I plan to do to move us toward it. Now, I know, being City Club members, you've heard this quote before, but I'm going to burden you with it one more time. 58 years ago, in a speech before the Portland City Club, Lewis Mumford issued his famous challenge to the people of the state of Oregon. And he said, "You have a basis here for civilization on the highest level. And I'm going to ask you a question that you may not like. Are you good enough to have this country in your possession? Do you have enough intelligence and imagination and cooperation between you to make the best use of these opportunities? I'd like to use that challenge as the basis for my remarks today. Will we keep the Oregon promise, so eloquently described half a century ago, or will we take it for granted and thus allow it to slip away? That, I believe, is the choice before us in 1996. Today, Oregon is still the best place in the world to live and to work because those who went before us cherished this place and guarded its gifts and protected its quality. But unless we commit ourselves to the kind of investments that we have made in the past, then I believe we are going to lose the Oregon that we love. In the simplest terms, that is the message of my speech. If we want to preserve the Oregon promise, then we're going to have to invest, not spend, but invest in things like education and transportation that will pay large returns in future prosperity and livability. But the only way we can afford to do this over the long term is if we are able to reduce expenditures in other parts of the budget through policy choices that we have to make now, specifically by reducing juvenile crime rates, by moving people off our welfare rolls and into the workforce. We can free up resources to reinvest in education and in transportation. That is the only way that we can keep faith with the future. So let's begin by looking at where we are today. Our economy today is on an upswing, but we cannot sustain that growth unless we commit ourselves to strengthening our entire school system from pre-kindergarten through lifelong learning opportunities. In the past, we've understood that if we want economic opportunities for our children, we had to provide access to quality education, and in fact, we have made the investments necessary to ensure that quality. In particular, the enrollment capacity of our post-secondary institutions has, until recently, kept up with demand, even during the baby boom period from 1960 through 1975. We were rightly proud of our ability to prepare a well-qualified workforce and to help young adults realize their full potential so that they could reach out and so that each successive generation could reinvest their talents and their energy to make Oregon an even better place. The importance of education was emphasized in Oregon Shines, the strategic document produced in 1986 by the Goldschmidt administration. In fact, the first of the three strategic initiatives identified in that document was to develop a superior workforce, an objective that is directly related to a superior educational system. 10 years later, this focus on education should be even more important as Oregon, along with the rest of the world, moves through the transition from an economy based primarily on labor and natural resource extraction to one that's based more on knowledge and on information. But that is not the case. Our efforts to fully fund public schools on an equitable basis for all Oregon children is struggling. You who live here in Portland know that. Your district is facing budget cuts that will clearly impact the quality of education for Portland school children. Our efforts to prepare Oregon citizens for the good jobs in our economy is undercapitalized. Our funding for higher education is a disgrace, a disaster waiting to happen. Oregon is dead last among the 50 states in per capita support of higher education. At a time when our economy demands highly trained workers, our choice to disinvest in education is at the same time a choice for stagnation, for low-wage jobs, and for a non-competitive workforce in the 21st century. And we're making the same choices with our transportation system. There's no doubt that Oregon's historical commitment to a high-quality transportation system has been a big part of our current economic success. Our roads, as well as other transportation systems, have helped get us where we are today. They enable our citizens to get to and from work and to school. They provide public access for the natural wonders which are Oregon's special treasure. Public transit reduces congestion and reduces pollution. And perhaps most importantly, our transportation infrastructure is a key to our economic well-being because it allows us to get our goods to markets outside the state of Oregon. But we are simply not maintaining this precious asset and this tremendous investment that we've made in the past. Over the next 7 years, Oregon faces a potential loss of more than $200 million in federal transportation funds. And at the same time, the Oregon legislature has not increased funding for the Highway Trust Fund in over 5 years. Quite simply, we do not have the money in the current system to keep up with growth and maintain our existing infrastructure. And every year we wait to fix the problem, it grows worse. Our estimates show that early in the next century, we will have only enough resources to either maintain our infrastructure or add capacity, and that is unacceptable because we must have the ability to do both. With Oregon's population growing at a rate of nearly 50,000 people a year, the lack of investment in our transportation system deprives us of a critical tool to manage that growth in a way that does not detract from our quality of life. There are those who believe that by not investing in our transportation system, we can somehow discourage growth. The fact of the matter is, inadequate transportation system does not discourage growth, it simply produces sprawl and congestion. Our choices in transportation, our choices in education, reveal a general and alarming trend that leads to one inescapable conclusion. We are not investing the way we have in the past. And it's not because we as a state aren't willing to put our resources behind our problems. It's more a matter of setting priorities. And let me give you but one stark example. In 1990, 13% of the state general fund went to higher education, and 4% went to corrections. Today, 9% of the general fund goes to corrections, and only 8% goes to higher education. That means that in the last 5 years, our general fund commitment to higher education has gone down 5%, and our general fund commitment to prisons has gone up 5%. Does this really reflect what Oregonians value? Of course not. But it is clear to me that our choices no longer reflect the values that have traditionally defined Oregon. We say that we value our economy, but we have not made education and transportation a top priority. We say we value our children and their safety, but we have not yet made crime prevention a top priority. We built a lot of prison beds, but we've done very little in the area of early intervention for at-risk youth who are committing crimes at a far higher rate than any other segment of our population. We say we value compassion, but 400,000 Oregonians still have no access to basic health care coverage. Is this the Oregon of the future? A place where people pay lip service to certain values and then by their actions undercut those values? Is the Oregon promise destined to fail? I say no. I say that the challenges we face today may be different than the ones we faced in the past, but they are not any greater. As I mentioned at the beginning of this speech, I believe we can make the investments necessary for our future prosperity, but to do so, we must act to reduce expenditures in other parts of the budget. So in that regard, I have 4 specific proposals today, which deal with reducing expenditures in public safety and in public assistance and in investing in transportation and in education. First, in public safety. We must enable our public safety system to both punish criminals and prevent crime. Today, we punish, but we don't prevent. Keeping people in prison will protect the public from new crimes by those particular offenders while they are in prison, but it will not prevent new crimes by new offenders. Building more prisons, which we have done and which we will continue to do under ballot measure 11, does not reduce crime rates. Between 1987 and 1991, we built more than 3,000 new prison beds in the state of Oregon at a cost of nearly $1 billion. Yet today, people feel no safer than they did 8 years ago. In fact, they feel less secure because of the dramatic increase of violent crimes committed by juveniles. Now, with ballot measure 11, we are going to build another 4,000 prison beds by 1999 at a cost of another $1 billion out of our general fund. Yet this huge expenditure does nothing to reduce the ever-growing number of juvenile delinquents who become young thugs, who become violent offenders. The only way to do that is to invest in prevention. to stem the tide of people coming into the system on the front end. That is one of the central goals of the Partnership for Community Corrections, Senate Bill 1145, and the primary objective of the upcoming special session. To Representative Mannix, to Representative Tiernan, and to others who oppose this effort and who view prevention as being soft on crime, I say this. We will punish those who commit crimes in the state of Oregon. We will fully implement the provisions of Ballot Measure 11, but to focus only on punishment and not at all on prevention is to accept the necessity of victims. It is to say that we don't care how many crimes are committed, we don't care how many victims are created as long as we can lock up the people who are responsible, and I simply don't buy it, and I don't think the Oregon people do either. I am not willing to continue to disinvest in education in order to build more prisons unless we make an equally strong and sincere commitment to reducing the incidence of crime, particularly among juveniles. That is how we reduce overhead. That is how we build a public safety system instead of simply a prison system. That is how we invest in the future, and I call on all Oregonians to support this effort in the upcoming special session. The second major area of overhead in our state government, if you will, lies in our welfare system. It is clearly in the best long-term interest of all of us, now and in the future, to support policies that help our vulnerable citizens move from dependence to independence whenever that is possible. And in this area, Oregon has been quite successful. Oregon's Welfare to Work program is fast becoming a model for the nation. But we need to recognize that a significant contributing factor to our success has been the Oregon Health Plan. By assuring low-income Oregonians that they won't lose access to health care if they get a job, we have been able to dramatically lower our welfare rolls. In the past year, we moved 4,500 families off welfare and into the workforce at a general fund biennial savings of $30 million. That is reducing overhead. We expect another 12% reduction in caseload over the current biennium, but our success will be short-lived if we do not continue our pioneering efforts to expand health care services to all of our citizens. Just 18 days ago, the employer mandate to provide health insurance was automatically and quietly repealed due to action taken by the legislature in 1993. This is nothing to celebrate. We have broken the promise of the Oregon Health Plan to extend basic health care coverage to 400,000 working Oregonians and their dependents who remain uninsured. This mandate may be repealed, but the problem won't go away. Those Oregonians will still be without coverage, they will still seek their primary care in the emergency departments, and the cost will still be shifted onto the business community and onto the rest of us. And most importantly, they will still be without the resources to do what the rest of us take for granted, keep their health. In the coming year, I will continue to press the case that these Oregonians must be afforded the opportunity for basic health care coverage. And if we are not to achieve this through an employer mandate, then we have the responsibility to enact an alternative approach. Over the next 10 months, I will call on our legislature, our business community, our labor organizations, and our health care providers to form a reinvigorated coalition to complete the health care reforms that we started in 1989. I will reconstitute the Oregon Health Council and charge it with developing a 6-year strategy for accomplishing the following. First, ensuring access to a basic benefit package for all Oregonians. This access will draw upon the strengths of our current public-private financing partnership, and it will focus as a first order of business to extending coverage to Oregon's working uninsured, and it will also address the needs of our migrant and our seasonal workers. Second, obtaining maximum health benefits from the resources we currently have in our health care system, ensuring that the system is efficiently capitalized, assuring that we use technology efficiently, and ensuring that our health professionals employ best practice standards. And finally, exploring the potential for broader community partnerships to address the underlying health needs that drive people into the healthcare system in the first place. This will involve not only increased community responsibility, but increased individual responsibility for the health status of Oregonians. By focusing on juvenile crime prevention, by focusing on expanding access to basic health care, I believe that we can continue to reduce expenditures in these two key areas, public safety and public assistance. And in the process, we will increase our ability to make investments in two areas that are probably the most critical to our future security and prosperity: transportation and education. Next week, I will be initiating a statewide effort to address our transportation infrastructure needs. I believe that we must invest in a transportation system that will deliver the kind of future that Oregonians want, a place where livability and growth can occur side by side. Let me make it clear, however, that we cannot fall back on another process that produces no more than a list of projects to be funded. Financing road construction or any transportation system improvement without giving thought to how we integrate them with land use, economic development, and housing strategies is doomed to failure. While there are very real capital construction needs that must be addressed, we cannot ultimately build our way out of this problem. Therefore, I intend to focus my initiative in a way that addresses these needs, but also helps us lower transportation construction and maintenance costs in the future and stretches our available resources as far as possible. The objective of this initiative must be to maintain quality communities that have a high level of livability as well as economic opportunities. There are several efforts underway around the state to meet the challenge of growth. Here in the Portland metropolitan region, Metro officials are doing transportation work in the framework of the 2040 plan. That plan represents on paper what we need to do on the ground. So I hope to build on local efforts like this and develop new relationships between the state and local and regional governments, which have the flexibility to deal with different needs in different parts of the state. To accomplish this, I will appoint 5 regional advisory committees that will assess community and regional transportation needs in different parts of the state. The committees will be made up of public and private leaders who will bring a fresh look and a broad perspective to the needs of their regions and their communities. I will also appoint a state advisory committee that will assess needs of statewide concern. This committee will integrate its recommendations with those of the regional advisory committees to produce a comprehensive package of recommendations for consideration by myself, the Oregon Transportation Commission, and legislative leadership. And I will ask these citizen committees to follow a 4-step path in developing recommendations related to transportation and growth management. First, to identify the most critical community livability and economic needs. Second, to determine which of these issues has an associated transportation need and what are the gaps in the ability to meet those needs. Third, examine what more can be done to close those gaps, assuming no additional resources. And fourth, if new resources are needed, the state committee will develop equitable funding options to maintain a close link between benefits and cost responsibility. Now, this may well involve an expanded financing role for local and regional governments in some parts of the state where growth is particularly challenging. I expect this process to produce recommendations by mid-year, which sets the stage for action on short-term objectives in early 1997. But I also expect the process to define a long-term agenda that helps us identify new approaches to management of financing and transportation and other infrastructure systems and services. Finally, I will look for the same level of cooperation from the state's educational community, because education is probably the single most important investment that we can make to keep faith with the future. But we must approach this challenge with a clear-eyed sense of Oregon's fiscal realities. I am not suggesting that our educational system is overfunded. It is not. I am simply saying that the likelihood of a major new funding source for education in the near future is remote. And if our strategy for schools is based solely on the expectation that the next legislative session is going to enact a major new tax increase, we may well find ourselves not only disappointed, but 2 more years down the road towards a failed system. What I am suggesting is that we must seek ways to reduce costs of the system without compromising quality and redirect the savings, plus any new resources that we may have available to us, to fill the gaps most critical to achieving our educational objectives. And we have to start. The first step is to stop thinking about our education system as a series of isolated islands, all competing for limited resources at the expense of one another. Our educational system must be viewed as a continuum. Because if our children aren't healthy and ready to learn when they get to school, it won't matter how superior our K-12 programs are. And if our high school graduates are unable to attend a college or university because there isn't room or because they can't afford it, then no matter how well prepared they are, we will not be training a competitive workforce for the 21st century. So today I am calling for a new commitment to Oregon education. I am calling upon historically separate educational and workforce organizations to pull together to create a single framework dedicated to the personal success of every Oregonian. As we proceed, I will insist that educational turf issues be set aside. But this is not a challenge directed just at the educational community. This is a challenge directed at all Oregonians. It is a challenge to students to value the opportunity to get an education. It is a challenge to parents to become involved in their education, in the education of their children. It is a challenge to the business community to actively support the development of tomorrow's workforce. And it is also a challenge to those who may not have children in school to recognize that it is the productivity of the workforce that supports Social Security and Medicare and other important programs. Here are the specific proposals that I will undertake. First, to make good on our commitment to full equity in school funding without sacrificing overall quality. We must move this debate beyond parochial disputes between neighboring districts to a collective focus on the overall health of the larger system. Second, I will call on the Department of Education to work with the joint boards of education to complete the steps necessary to fully implement the Educational Reform Act of the 21st century. Third, to reduce the cost in our primary and secondary system, I will call on educators and private sector leaders in technology and telecommunication to develop new ways of delivering instruction. And I want to stress that our school teachers are doing a tremendous job under challenging circumstances, and it is our obligation to find new ways to support those efforts. Fourth, I will charge the Chancellor of Higher Education and the Community College Commissioner to work with their colleagues to create the capacity for the 5,000 new high school graduates that we will see in the next 5 years. This will require working with leaders in the telecommunication industry to fashion an Oregon virtual university through which courses, degrees, workforce training can be delivered through satellite and cyberspace. And it will also require a close working relationship with our private institutions of higher education. Fifth, I will call on business leaders to recommend those education standards and workforce training programs that will work best for them here in Portland and throughout the state as we move towards the 21st century. I expect work on these 5 initiative areas to be finished by the fall, when I will present a 6-year plan to implement them, as well as specific recommendations for the 1997 legislative session. Although neither our educational system or our transportation system is yet at a point of crisis, I am not willing to wait until a crisis occurs before taking action. That is not the way we've addressed these problems in the past, and I see no reason and no virtue in doing it now. In fact, had our forebears acted on that principle, the Oregon promise today would be only a shadow on the face of history. Instead, we have the opportunity to act now in public safety and in public assistance to save resources in the long term. And we have the need to reinvest those savings, as well as any new resources we might have available, into our transportation and education systems. We must do these things to keep Oregon the kind of place in which we want to live and work. And we must do them together or we will not be able to deliver the Oregon promise. This promise is alive today, dormant perhaps, but ready to flourish again if given proper care. But make no mistake about it, unless we actively recommit ourselves, every single one of us, to the qualities and the priorities and the investments that have defined Oregon and made it great, 10 years from now, Oregon will not be a good place to live. This is no time to turn our backs on our heritage of wise stewardship. Today, we still have a choice. We haven't yet ruined our water, or fouled our air, or extinguished precious species. We haven't fallen prey to the urban sprawl and congestion that defines our neighbors to the north and to the south. We haven't shut down our universities or allowed our highways or bridges to deteriorate beyond repair. We, you and I, are still in control of the fate of this state. And if we believe that future generations deserve the same blessings and opportunities that we have been given, it is our choice, it is still our choice, to make that a reality. And what higher honor can we pay to our forebears than to pledge that the matchless promise of the great state of Oregon will pass undiminished into the 21st century and beyond? And what greater proof that we are good enough to have this country in our possession, and that we have enough intelligence and imagination and cooperation among us to make the best of Oregon. Today, I ask you to join me in meeting the challenges that lie ahead. Thank you.
Governor, thank you, and on behalf of the Board of Governors of the City Club of Portland, thank you for choosing this forum to present your vision for the state. And I, today, in honor of the Governor's appearance, chose his fashion lesson. My question, Governor, is given the concerns you expressed about our shift in resources away from education and also into public safety and corrections, and the fact that some of those shifts was driven directly by ballot measures passed by the citizens of the state, do you at this point believe that reform of the Oregon initiative process is necessary? And if so, how would you recommend changing it?
The short answer is yes. I do believe the initiative process needs reform. I want to make it clear that I'm very supportive of the initiative process and would certainly not do anything to deprive our citizens of that kind of access. But I think there are questions about the ease with which these issues appear on the ballot, the ability to essentially buy your way onto the ballot, and the question of the technical quality of the initiatives that appear on the ballot. The reality is that to reform the initiative process, one must file an initiative. Because it requires a constitutional change. I would prefer that the legislature refer some change after some careful thought and public deliberation, and we'll continue to support that and would be more than happy to work with legislative leadership to try to address that issue. If I may just add one other point on that topic, there are two ways one can abuse the initiative process. One is the one that people generally recognize. Another is to use the legislative process to refer things to the ballot that can be used for political purposes in upcoming election cycles. And there have been rumors, I doubt that there's any credence to any of them, that in the special session there will be an attempt to do just that. And I want to make it clear right now that I will take a very strong and vocal opinion against manipulating the initiative process and the referral process in that fashion.
It's now your opportunity to approach either microphone and address questions to the governor. I would remind you that only City Club members are privileged to be asking these questions.
Yes,
Governor Kitzhaber, it may appear I'm genuflecting, but the fact is the microphone is so low, we're all going to look like the Hunchback of Notre Dame. Thank you.
Lower. That one too.
Governor Kitzhaber, between your call for the participation of businesses that I heard several times sprinkled throughout your address today, and what I perceive to be one of the premises of cutbacks in federal spending from the U.S. Congress to call upon businesses at the local and state levels to pick up the differences in the funding or participate in policy development, I get the impression that you have the same expectation as the U.S. Congress, Republican majority, that business will ramp up its participation in policy development and funding issues. I'd like to ask you if you could share with the City Club those businesses that have already stepped forward, and if you could also share with us what their interests have been. Perhaps they're not all interested in transportation, but perhaps they have their own special interests and would like to address those. Can you share with us the businesses or the sectors of the business world that are interested in participating?
That are interested?
Yes.
Well, my experience during 15 years in the legislature was that most elements of the business community are interested in being involved in the development of public policy if, in fact, they are given the opportunity to do so. The business community, AOI in particular, was enormously involved in the development of the original Oregon Health Plan in 1989. The business community has been enormously involved, organized business groups like the Oregon Business Council, again AOI, have been very involved in the development of the Educational Reform Act for the 21st century. So to me, it's not an issue of business not wanting to be involved. I think it's an issue of how you provide an opportunity for their constructive participation. I do want to make it clear that I hope that my agenda doesn't even have a faint resemblance to the Gingrich agenda.
Governor Kitzhaber, could you share with us what their expressed interests are?
Well, I think I can't speak for all of the business members of the business community who do get involved in policy development. I can use a couple of examples, and I'll use two. The original decision to go with an employer mandate, which was admittedly controversial within the business community, was eventually at that time supported by Associated Oregon Industries because they recognized that through the cost shift, they were paying the costs of those who did not have health insurance coverage. Plus, there's a wide recognition that offering a health insurance benefit coverage gives you a better opportunity to retain and attract qualified workers. I think the motivation of those businesses that were involved in the Education Reform Act is a recognition that as the world changes and the economy changes, our educational institutions have to change not only to benefit citizens, but to provide a workforce for maintaining our competitive edge in a global economy.
Governor Steve Buckstein, City Club member. Well, I applaud you for recognizing that some spending on some of these major programs is not productive, such as I would agree that the $1 billion spent on additional prison beds hasn't made us feel any safer. But there are some of us, maybe a minority, who believe that $1 billion or similar amounts on more light rail in the Portland area may also not reduce pollution or congestion. As many people here may know, the Oregon Supreme Court just found that the bill funding light rail in the summer was unconstitutional. And I think the reason appeared to be that it was really a chaotic process. And I wonder if you will open yourself up to looking at more creative ways to find more productive ways to solve our transportation problems rather than just trying to push through that same measure that really led to all these problems.
You are correct. The Supreme Court did throw out the light rail portion of the Christmas tree, if you will. That because it violated the single issue provision. There are about 3 comments I'd like to make on that, and one is my own, and then I'll directly address yours. The first is this should be an example to all of us of the danger of trying to play that game in a special legislative session. We spent over a week down there at about $30,000 a day, and because of these shenanigans, we now basically don't have the very product that we went in to get. It is my intention to make good on the commitment that I have made to provide the state match for the light rail project. And I have communicated my intentions to the legislative leadership. I will ask them to pass the identical bill in the special session to maintain the commitments that I believe we made to the voters of this state, both in the metropolitan area and the rural transportation initiative that was associated with that. The legislative leadership, bipartisan leadership, supported this bill. It had over 2/3 votes of both chambers when it came out, and I would not anticipate a problem. Having said that, I think the point you raise about light rail itself as a panacea for our growth problems is very well taken. Building a light rail line by itself is not going to solve congestion in this area unless you do a number of other things that provide incentives and make it more convenient and more cost-effective for people to actually get on that. And whether that's congestion pricing or other modalities, you cannot do this alone and expect it to solve your problems. It has to be a much broader and more comprehensive approach, and I expect that that will happen. Yes, sir.
Ray Polani, a City Club member.
You
Governor.
want to ask about transit by any chance?
Yes. You guessed it. Unpredictable, I guess. The Highway Trust Fund raises in the state some $500 to $600 million per year. And even though the Highway Department says that that's not enough to maintain and preserve the infrastructure that we have, it clearly is enough. On the other hand, the alternatives are scrounging around for money by lottery, by cigarette taxes, what have you. And every year, the unpredictability of the availability of funding is a serious problem. And of course, the alternatives are underbuilt and available. So the question of funding really is the crucial one. We think that there should be, for the voters of Oregon, a look at the flexibility of the trust fund. The trust fund should be available for alternatives. It should not be devoted exclusively to build more of what is giving us sprawl and the problems. How do you feel about it?
I have in the past and continue to support more flexibility in the Highway Trust Fund. I think as we begin to urbanize parts of our state, the whole issue of transit, the whole issue of air quality issues are directly related to the use of the fund. I was not one who supported removing the Oregon State Police from the Highway Trust Fund. I think highway safety is an issue that should be directly related to road construction and operation. That requires a constitutional amendment, as you know. I don't want to prejudge the outcome of the process I'm setting up, but if that happened, if that were an element of it, I certainly would not oppose that.
Governor Kitzhaber, Dan Anderson, City Club member. I'll try something other than transportation.
Thank you.
You remarked that you lack sympathy for the Gingrich agenda, appropriately so, I think. Nevertheless, I would submit that so long as the Congress continues to have the tone it has today, we all live downstream of it, particularly with regard to federal participation in the funding of social programs in Oregon, and certainly health care is part of that. Another one, which is probably a bit less well understood, is federal participation in low-income energy assistance, which has been substantially reduced this year, and it's targeted for being zeroed out. And earlier you were responding to a question talking about public-private initiatives to kind of respond to some of this. I wonder if you could share with us what, if anything, your office is doing to speak to this particular withdrawal of a historical federal responsibility.
Yes, sir. Two things. One, I have sent a series of letters back to a wide range of people in the federal government expressing concern, and I don't stand alone here. Many governors have done that, about the impact of these cutbacks, particularly on low-income individuals during the winter months. I will be in the very near future, probably through executive order, creating a working group or a task force, if you will, comprised of the utilities and consumers to try to develop a strategy inside Oregon to deal with that issue in the face of the cutbacks that we expect will continue coming out of Washington, D.C.
Excuse me, I'd just like to remind you, our governor is being very polite in listening to your comments, but we would ask that you keep the questions to 30 seconds, and Chuck, I know you'll do that.
Promise, Chris. Chuck Williams, member. Governor, what analysis have you done about the flat tax proposal, a federal flat tax, and what effect that would have on Oregon? And I probably don't need to add this part of the question, but what's your opinion of it, please?
I am not a supporter of the flat tax as it is currently being proposed. I didn't support the 2% flat tax that was on our ballot. I'm not saying there is not a virtue to dramatically simplifying the federal tax code and, in fact, the Oregon tax code, but I think this is a rather simplistic approach, and I have not seen good numbers on the actual impact on your average taxpayer. My understanding is that this would essentially improve the tax status of people at the lower end and the high end of the code, and would increase the tax burden of those in the middle. I think we have to ask ourselves also what kind of exemptions will be on it. The home mortgage exemption has now been added back, and this, I believe, is the political process at work. Because I think this will eventually be rejected. My recollection is that the Reagan administration considered a flat tax and decided that it was not feasible.
Josephine Pope, member. Given the tax advantage incentives recently, would you comment? Let's see. Start again. Given the tax incentives granted to recently arriving and soon to arrive corporations, would you comment on the implications of these arrivals and the tax incentives on the state's economic resources and on the state's infrastructure?
Well, I think that the whole issue of the strategic investment program and the enterprise zone program really are two things that we need to have a public debate on. I am not prejudging what we should do with those, but I think there's some questions that we need to begin to ask ourselves, and one of them, of course, is the impact of on infrastructure, on education, transportation infrastructure of these companies. But in the process of having that debate, we need to recognize that that impact, if you want to attract that level of employment, which is essentially not out of the ballpark for what the Portland area was trying to attract. You could have a heavy manufacturing company, for example, with the same employment that would have a far greater impact on your infrastructure. So it does have to be a fairly objective analysis, and I think the question we need to be asking ourselves, one of the key questions is not only the impact on the infrastructure, but what is the wage profile of the jobs that are being brought in. One of the positive sides of the strategic investment program is that you can make an agreement with the company on what that wage profile is going to look like as a part of the agreement for the tax reduction. I guess my biggest concern about those two programs is not the programs themselves or the companies that are coming in, but why shouldn't we be providing the same kinds of opportunities to companies that have already made a decision to be part of the Oregon family? And so I intend to have a good open debate of those issues between now and the next legislative session, and I think those need to be considered very, very closely.
Keith Kohlberg, City Club member. I have a three-part question. What do you see at stake in this next Senate race that we're having?
The current one or the next one?
Excuse me, the current Senate race, excuse me. What would you like to see our next senator accomplish and promote in office, and what would you like to see our next senator fight? And which of the candidates would you see most likely to promote those interests, the best interests of Oregon as you see them?
I think it's no secret that I am strongly supporting Congressman Wyden's bid to be our next United States Senator. The issues are fairly clear. There's some real philosophical difference between the two candidates, and they are on things like support for a strong framework of environmental and land use laws, which Ron strongly supports. And I would remind you that about half of the bills I vetoed last session were bills that would have had a detrimental impact on our ability to maintain the environmental integrity of this state. One is the issue of choice. One, I believe, is the issue of civil rights for all members of our society. And I think one is really just basically has to do with the ability to reach across party lines and find common ground for the state, which I think Ron has been enormously effective at doing over his tenure in Congress.
Governor Kitzhaber, Jim Francisconi, City Club member. My comment is I thank you for the strongest statement I've ever heard on behalf of an Oregon official on the need for prevention as a crime-reducing strategy. So that's the first thing I want to say, Governor, and thanks for that. The question is, what specifically can you do to advance the educational and employment needs of at-risk youth?
I don't have a simple answer. So let me just say that up front. I'm convinced that if you are successful in dealing with juvenile crime prevention, which I think has to be done locally, you will also, of a necessity, address issues of housing and economic opportunity and health care, because they are really indistinguishable when you look at the reasons and the profiles of these kids who end up getting involved in the criminal justice system. What we are attempting to do in this legislative session is set up a framework, if you will, set up the infrastructure to begin that task through what we call the local public safety coordinating councils, which are appointed by the county commission and the presiding judge. They have 3 tasks. One is directly related to managing the less than 12-month offender population with the resources that we're going to be providing to the counties. But the second 2, which is very important, but the second 2 are to target 15, 16, and 17-year-olds in their county who are the kids that now come under the jurisdiction of ballot measure 11, and try to intervene in those kids before it's too late. And to develop a community-specific juvenile crime prevention program for kids under 15 to help them in that task. We have established a task force that the Attorney General is chairing on juvenile crime prevention with a broad and I think distinguished membership that will help provide some recommendations to the local entities. And I will be trying to target resources in a number of state agencies that currently ostensibly go to juvenile crime prevention, and they're in the state police and the youth authority and Department of Corrections and DHR, and bundle those up to provide an opportunity to help fund these local efforts. And in addition, I plan to use some of the actually a considerable amount of next year's burn grants fund targeted for juvenile crime prevention.
Kent Snyder, City Club member. Would you share with us your opinion on the expansion that we've been seeing in gambling, both in the Indian gambling and the use in the lottery, and the expansion of the Oregon lottery?
The issue, the question had to do with the expansion of gambling in Oregon, and I must tell you that I'm very concerned about the expansion of gambling for 2 reasons. One is the increased dependence of our state general fund on gambling revenues. Legislators on both sides of the aisle, this is not a partisan comment, view lottery money as not real money. There was a bill down there that, had it passed, would have essentially engaged this state in lottery futures. I mean, they wanted to spend about the next $100 million that came in over the top before it was even realized. And that attitude and that revenue has placed our educational system and a whole host of other systems, I think, at some jeopardy. The lottery shortfall that we're currently seeing, I think, is directly attributable to the casino gambling of the tribes, and I want to make it clear that the tribes are not doing anything illegal. They are operating under the rules that they are allowed to operate under the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act. But the pressure that I'm getting is to rev up the state system and to chase that revenue stream by expanding state gambling, and that's what I'm not willing to do until we've had a discussion about what is the impact of that choice on the culture of this state, and do we want to end up in a position where gambling policy drives public policy because of the relationship between gambling and funding other social programs? Again, I would again the Attorney General, the esteemed Attorney General, is that's what he gets for not running again. I'm just going to tax him to death. He's heading a task force that does have tribal representation, that will have a good open public debate on this issue and make some recommendations for us next June. But this is an enormous issue, and that we do have to address, I think, explicitly.
Excuse me again. This is going to have to be the last question.
Good timing.
Governor, you mentioned some concerns about segments of the education community battling with each other and community against community in fighting for limited state dollars. It seems to me one way to minimize that problem would be to return some of the the funding to the local level. Would you support any kind of local funding option for school districts?
The answer is yes. The challenge is how you craft it, but I think one of the things, the untoward effects of ballot measure 5 was that we really stripped away local control. We shifted the funding, so we have a state-funded educational system that's operated by individually locally elected school boards. So there's this real disconnect between the revenue flow and the sort of the management decisions. And I think that sooner or later we are going to have to try to address that local option. I would say, and no one wants to really address this, but to make that work and to not get in trouble with the courts eventually, we are going to have to define basic education. We are going to have to define the content that we think every child, whether they live in Portland or Lakeview, has to get out of the educational system. And once we come to terms with that, then that ought to be a state responsibility. Every district ought to have the resources to make sure every child gets that, but then I strongly believe that above and beyond that, that districts should have the flexibility to provide revenue from the community to do additional things if they choose. Thank you.
Governor Kitzhaber, thank you for your leadership and your responsiveness to our questions and our concerns. We are convinced that we're heading into the 21st century in good hands. But for now, we are adjourned.